Well, hi everyone. It's great to be here with you at a time where we couldn't all be together in New York City, unfortunately, but now we get to see even more people at a time when we're trying to figure out the COVID virus and obviously lots of social unrest here in the United States and elsewhere, and Oceana standing with the social justice community for equality and justice. And so I'm happy to be with you here today. I'm going to share my screen because I have some slides too, just like Andy did. But what I want to talk about today is plastics. And to follow along with the Fashinnovation theme, fashion is plastic free. So I want to talk to you about the plastics crisis, which you've obviously, I know you're all very familiar with. We're being inundated by plastics everywhere we go. It's everywhere. It's a material that is not going to break down. We're basically stuck with it forever. It's bad for the environment. It threatens marine animals, and it threatens us. About 17.5 billion, with a B, pounds of plastics get into our oceans every year. That works out to 8 million metric tons, not to throw a lot of numbers at you. But what that equivalent of that is one dump truck load of plastics getting into our oceans every minute. So in the 15 or 20 minutes I'm going to talk with you today, we're going to know that about 15 to 20 dump truck loads of plastics are getting into our oceans. Of course, once they're there, right? They don't really break down. They don't break down into smaller and smaller particles, but they don't actually disappear. So that's a real concern. Now that means that we find plastics everywhere we go. In Oceana, we like to go deep into the ocean with our submersible cameras and things like that. But we know that plastics have been found melting out of ice caps. We've been finding plastics at the deepest trenches in the oceans. They're everywhere. And that's a real big problem for marine animals. And you can see why when you look at this picture of the sea turtle, a lot of times plastics look like food to these animals. So what's a sea turtle's favorite food? It's jellyfish. So this plastic bag looks like food to the sea turtle. And that's true of a lot of different types of plastics and a lot of different types of animals, and they tend to consume this. And so, for instance, there was one study that looked at the bellies of sea turtles. Over 100 sea turtles they looked at, every single one had plastics in its belly. That's a big problem because it means that it could damage their digestive system on the way in. It could block their digestive system. It could make them feel full, so they don't feel like they have to feed. And it could also create a bubble within their digestive system that makes it harder for them to dive down to get the food that they need to survive. So this is a life and death problem for marine animals. You've also heard about whales that have been found washing up on beaches dead with tons of plastic in their bellies. And that's a big problem. And then, of course, there's birds. These are albatross on Midway Atoll in the middle of the ocean, actually almost like the middle of nowhere. These birds are still finding plastics when they're trying to find fish. And then they feed the plastics literally directly to their young. And the fact that this photographer was able to find a picture of this happening shows you how prevalent that it is. And it doesn't, again, has no nutritional value to these animals. It doesn't break down, and it ends up in their stomachs and sometimes stays there forever. You can see this picture showing what was in the stomach of this albatross all the way to the end. Another big issue with plastics is, as I said, they don't break down. They kind of break up into smaller and smaller pieces, and that creates what we call microplastics. Microplastics are tiny particles of plastics, even smaller than what's being shown in this picture. And they're in our oceans. How many pieces of microplastics are in the ocean is something we may never know. There was one study that estimated 5 trillion pieces of microplastics in the oceans, and that was like 5 or 6 years ago, so we know it's more now. And they essentially float around, but they also oftentimes are mistaken as to be food by fish that are looking for little tiny critters to eat, and they eat plastics instead. This is a big problem. So what's driving this problem? Well, this plastics problem is largely being driven and being made bigger by the expansion in availability of natural gas liquids, which we're getting through fracking, especially here in the United States. and the petroleum industry looking for products that they can make because they know they're not going to be able to sell all of these natural gas liquids as fuel. And plastics is the solution to them. And so there's a promotion of more and more plastics getting into our environment. And one of the biggest problems with that is single-use plastics. They're plastics that are used once and then thrown away, which I'm going to come back to in a minute. But right now, just to give you an idea, globally, companies are producing more than 400 million metric tons of plastics every year. 400 million tons of plastics every year. And that's increasing. That's actually a number that's going up. And Reuters, actually, the news company, did a really great graphic last year called Drowning in Plastic. And it gives you an idea of how much plastic we're creating. And I want to share it with you because it's really cool. And what it does is it looks at how many plastic bottles are being sold over time. Okay, second by second, minute by minute, year by year, how many plastic bottles are we selling? And they've put that into this wonderful video, which shows the number of plastic bottles we are selling as we speak. And you can see the number going up on the left-hand side of the screen, the number of plastic bottles that are being sold every second of every hour of every day. And what it turns out to be, if you let this thing run for a full minute, is 1 million plastic bottles being sold every minute. And you can see it very quickly starts to dwarf that dump truck and that little dump truck driver. And that gives you an idea. This is happening not just now that we're talking for this 1 minute, but it's happening every minute of every hour of every day. And this is just bottles. This is just one type of plastic. Just to give you an idea how big this problem is. I'm not even going to run it for the full minute. And so if you were to let that run up for a whole day, the mountain of plastic bottles that would be created would be about half the height of the Eiffel Tower in Paris. If you ran it for a month, it would be a mountain twice the size of the Eiffel Tower. And if you run it for for 10 years, for the past 10 years, 4 trillion bottles we've sold into commerce. 4 trillion bottles that don't go away once we make them. They never go away. They're somewhere. And that mountain is bigger than Manhattan. So it gives you an idea of the magnitude of this problem. And if this isn't bad enough, to me, this is really the clincher. Plastic production is not leveling off. It's actually going to quadruple between now and 2050. Okay, so if you think the problem's bad now, it's only getting worse. What's getting into our oceans, the 8 million metric tons I told you about, that's going to increase too. We expect to see that go up 70% just between now and 2025. Between 2010 and 2025 is what this number represents. So if you think the beaches look bad now, they're going to look good compared to the beaches of 2025 unless we figure out a way to stop this problem. So the question is, which future do we want? Do we want a future where we continue to produce more plastics and the oceans look even worse than they do today? Or do we want a future we figure out how to produce less, not level it off, but produce less plastics, and we can get back to healthy oceans? Obviously, the answer is pretty obvious, right? So where is this plastic going? Just to give you an idea, because we got to solve this problem, we have to know what we're using it for. And it turns out that a lot of it's being used in packaging, 36%, but also building construction, textiles, and other products. But just to zoom in for a minute on that 36%, the largest sector is plastic packaging, single-use material designed for immediate disposal. Okay, so if we could attack this problem of single-use material, we could really make a big dent in the plastics problem. And I like to say that plastics, to use a material that is designed to last forever, to make a product that is designed to last for minutes and then be thrown away, is totally unsensible, not sensible. Sorry, I just looked at my time and wondered if I was running out of time. I think I'm still okay. But anyway, 36%, that's the piece that Oceana wants to attack. We want to attack this problem of unnecessary single-use plastics, and that's mostly what we're focused on. I will mention that textiles are 14%, since this is a fashion audience, and you work with textiles. 14% of the use of plastic are textiles. They are not single use for the most part. So not so much the top priority from our standpoint, but they are an area where you could see some opportunity to reduce plastics. 60% of textiles are made from plastics. And so that means that a lot of the clothing that we are wearing, using, selling, whatever you do with clothing, are coming from plastic. Fibers are working their way into the environment and into our oceans. Most of that is microplastics, so contributing to that microplastics problem, okay? So there's opportunities to find ways to use alternative materials like rayon, cotton, lyocell. There's many others that actually do break down in the environment, or they break down in a composting environment better than plastic, and we can move in that direction. So single-use plastics, as I said, are profoundly flawed by design. We're using material made to last forever in order to make products that we want to use once and then throw away. And so what are the products I'm talking about? They're things like straws, plastic utensils, plastic beverage bottles, grocery bags, the single-use plastics types of problems. And this is an area where we can make a real big dent in the plastics problem. So what are the solutions? Well, before I get into the solution, I want to talk about what won't work, okay? One of the things that won't work, and this is maybe going to be a shock, but it's recycling. We're going to hear a lot about recycling today. When it comes to plastics, recycling only solves about 2% of the problem. I know, it's surprising because we think that if we're recycling, it's under control, right? If I buy a recycled product, or if I can recycle my thing, then I shouldn't feel bad about using the plastic. The truth of the matter is recycling is not solving the problem. It's only solving about 2% of it. When you look at recycling, when you look at plastics and where they're going, you can see that it says that 14% are recycled, right? You can see that 14% are recycled. 40% go to landfills, 14% get burned, also not so good for the environment. 32% leakage basically means they're going into the environment either because they were litter, or they fell out of the truck or whatever. They didn't make it to the final destination they were intended. So 14% recycled is really not accurate. The reason I say 2% is because when you look at that 14% that's recycled, 8% of the 14 is actually going into what we call downcycling. It's being used for another product that isn't going to always be there, right? That product is also going to have a limited lifetime, maybe 2 years, maybe 3, but it's ultimately still going to end up as waste. Some of it is lost in the process, and only 2% of the total amount of plastics that's being produced is effectively recycled. Well, maybe we could get better at recycling, and that's what a lot of companies tell you. We're going to get better at it. We're going to collect everything. It's going to be great. But remember, production, and this graph is showing you production is massively increasing, right? It's going up really fast. And the idea that we can make recycling keep up with that is really hard to believe. There's really no evidence that we can do that, especially because we used to think we were recycling when we were sending it to China for recycling. China realized they couldn't handle it and they stopped taking it. So even that 2% is really questionable. Okay, so that gives you an idea of sort of one thing that we know will not work. When we think about recycling, it reminds me of the analogy of the bathtub, right? When your bathtub is overflowing, what's the first thing you do? Well, you don't just run for the mop, right? While the faucet's still running, the first thing you do is you turn off the faucet. Well, it's the same thing with plastics. Recycling is the mop. The first thing we have to do is not run for the mop. We have to turn off the faucet, which means we have to stop producing so much plastic. We can try to recycle it, but it's coming in so fast out of the faucet that we're never going to keep up. And we have to find ways to reduce. Now, a lot of people take it on themselves and they say, what can I do? I'm going to try to buy plastic-free products. Well, if you go to the store and you try to buy a plastic-free product, like a hair product, for instance, just really aren't very many choices, right? So it's kind of not effective to say, well, consumers have to solve this problem. We can't leave this in the hands of consumers. We need companies to be providing consumers with plastic-free choices. So what's Oceana going to do? We're going to do 3 things. First of all, we're going to pass policies that reduce plastics use. Policies like banning styrofoam, banning plastic utensils, et cetera, and policies that can actually reduce the demand for plastic in the first place. At the same time, we want to try to create what we call plastic-free zones. Now, they won't be 100% plastic-free, but maybe free from single-use unnecessary plastics. And plastic-free zones could mean like a university, a church, it could mean a town, it could even mean your corporate offices. So Oceana's working to make its corporate offices single-use plastic-free. It's not going to be 100%. We're going to get as close as we can, but we hope other companies will do the same. And we'd like to work with companies that are interested in doing that. So if you are, please contact me afterwards, because we have some models we can share with you about how to get single-use plastics out of your offices. And then the third thing we want to do is we want to get companies to offer plastic-free choices. It's only then that consumers will really be able to exercise their consumer muscle, as if they're being given plastic-free choices. This is another thing we're hoping to get done. In fact, we have one campaign where we're focused on getting Amazon to provide plastic-free packaging for consumers. And if you're interested in that campaign, there's a petition on change.org. You can sign it, or you can become an Oceana Wavemaker, and we'll get you engaged in that campaign. Now, when I get to policies, when I talk about the policies we want to focus on, we're already seeing a trend in policies that are starting to increase the number of policies regulating single-use plastics. And we need this graph to catch fire and shoot up the way a plastics production curve does, so that we can get more policies around the world. And Oceana is working in many countries and many states in the United States towards getting those policies. We're already starting to see some progress. In Canada, Prime Minister Trudeau has called for action against plastics in his formal advice to his legislature to get some plastics reduction legislation. In Chile, a strong bill that Oceana has introduced is already in play to deal with banning disposable plastics, and that's now in the Senate in Chile. In Belize, they've already passed a law that Oceana worked on that we're now trying to get implemented that will phase out throwaway plastic bottles. And in the United States, Oceana has been working with a coalition called Break Free from Plastics. And we've been able to get a bill introduced in Congress in the United States called the Break Free from Plastics Pollution Act. And that is now working its way through Congress. And we'll have to continue to push on that in the coming probably couple of years. New York State, where we had hoped to be standing today, the Governor Cuomo, has already banned polystyrene beginning in 2021. This is what we call styrofoam. That's the brand name. But polystyrene is that type of material that's used for making clamshells for takeout container, peanuts for packaging. They won't be using that in New York starting in 2021. So we're seeing progress, but we need this to really explode everywhere. We're seeing companies that are starting to offer plastics-free choices. Marks and Spencer in the UK has launched plastic-free aisles for produce. That's one example of it. We saw that Lush was opening its first quote-unquote naked shop. That's, I think, probably some pretty good marketing. Here, that's in the UK, where everything is going to be completely packaging-free. And there's an airline, Portuguese airline, that is offering plastic-free passenger flights, which is great. No single-use plastic. Imagine how much plastic you could save if you weren't giving all those single-use plastics out on every single plane flight when we get planes back, when we start flying again. And so that's another example. But each of these examples is meant to be sort of the seed that says, look, if we can do this, we can go big, right? We can move this whole industry to plastic-free, multiple industries, and pretty soon you see the numbers start going down instead of going up. And that's what we're aiming for. And then the last example, Meliá, the hotel chain, offering plastic-free hotel rooms. Isn't that great? I mean, it seems to me like it would be more of a luxury hotel room if it was plastic-free. So again, let's try to scale some of this stuff up. So that takes me back to the sea turtle. The real reason why we're talking about this for Oceana is we care about marine life. And we're going to continue to try to educate people about this issue, try to expose the problem. We want to try to expose that some of the solutions that are making everybody feel better are not really necessarily the solutions that are going to solve the problem. To recognize that if we really want to curb the amount of plastic waste that's going into the ocean, there's one answer: turn off the faucet. Stop producing so much plastics. And if there's one thing you take away from this talk, I hope it's that. And you can help make that happen. So please get involved, engage with Oceana, and thank you for all that you're doing.
Thank you so much. That was incredible. And honestly, I mean, I walked away with so many things I didn't even know. And the amount of plastic bottles bought, like every second that you were posting up there, was scary.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. So thank you. That was incredible, really. And I think a lot of people could take a lot of insight from that. There's some questions that came in from the audience. So I'm going to read them out to you. The first one: is there anything that individuals can actually do to make a difference?
You know, that is the most common question that I get pretty much every time I speak. And I think obviously there are things that individuals can do, but I think people get almost like lost on that question, because it's really, what really has to happen in order to solve this problem is we need companies to give us choices, right? Like we could say, well, I'm going to try not to buy plastic, but you'll make yourself crazy trying to do that, honestly. We're not being given enough plastic-free choices. And so companies have to give us those. So the best thing individuals can do is demand that companies give them plastic-free choices. Ask for it when you do your takeout, or when you book a hotel room, or even on a flight. Can I get a plastics-free lunch? I've heard of people doing that. And then we start to demand it, and companies provide it. And that's the most important thing. And I would say the second most is be political. Engage with, you know, decision makers. Push for plastic-free policies for your town or your state, or even national policies if you're engaged at the national level. Every little town can have a plastics-free ordinance. They can say, well, in our town, we're not going to allow, I don't know, plastic utensils or straws or both. Or we're going to not allow any single-use plastic on all of our town property, none of our parks, none of our offices. You can push your towns to do that. So there's a lot of things people can do to get engaged. There's easy things like become a wave maker. Go to oceana.org and sign up. And we'll send you actions all the time, and you can sign petitions and call your members of your legislature, and also demand this of the companies that you engage with.
Okay, then someone else wrote in. Her name is Tara, and I think it's, yeah, she says individuals can send by U.S. mail service a piece of plastic to the producers with a note telling them to solve the problem that they have created. It's not very costly for the individual. What do you think of that idea?
Why not? I mean, I think it's important for producers to understand that the public is increasingly dissatisfied with this sort of cheap solution, and maybe they can get their attention. I think that's the kind of thing that's most important, is using your voice to demand better from the companies that are offering you this. And I know there are a lot of people on this call that represent companies. What can your companies do? Can you go plastic-free in your corporate offices? Can you offer plastic-free products? Can you shift your textile choices to use less polyester? Those are all the kinds of things that can really make a big difference, especially if we do it as leaders first, and then ultimately it gets scaled and it becomes the norm. And that's really what we're heading for.
Thank you so much. The other question is, would improving recycling solve the plastic pollution problem?
Right. And so I don't think it's possible to improve recycling enough to solve this problem. When you look at the fact that we're really only effectively recycling 2% of what we're producing, you know, even if we multiply that by 10 and we're recycling 20% of what we're producing, if we keep producing more and more, we're going to have to keep recycling more and more. We're barely even going to be able to keep up. And so I don't think recycling is the solution. I think the first solution is you make less, right? You turn off the tap so less of it is coming in. And then you can try your best to recycle what's there, what's left, and try to improve recycling. And then maybe you can catch up. But if we keep the tap flowing at full speed, we're not going to be able to recycle our way out of this problem.
The other one here is, aren't bio-based plastics or bioplastics made from renewable resources and a sustainable alternative to fossil fuels-based plastic?
Yes, that's a good question. It's interesting. Bio-based plastics sound like the green plastic, right? Like the organic plastic, because they're made out of plants and instead of being made out of petroleum. So in some ways, we haven't used petroleum. So, all of the externalities associated with getting petroleum, producing it, transporting it, spilling it, which always happens. Yes, you've avoided that. But the truth of the matter is, when you use plants to make plastic, the final product is the exact same chemical composition as petroleum-based product. So that plastic is not going to have any better fate in the environment than petroleum-based plastic. It's not going to break down into its elemental form. It's going to break up into smaller and smaller pieces and end up in the environment if that's its fate. So it's kind of, again, it's kind of a false solution and not really the direction we need to be going in. Really a very simple answer: make less plastic, use less plastic.
So I think I have two more questions, but I think this one is really interesting based on everything. Do you want to take away the medical industry's single-use plastics, which are essential in preventing contamination and infection?
Now, of course not. We don't like infections. No, and that's why I was emphasizing throughout my talk, we're talking about unnecessary single-use plastics. We're talking about things that are mostly packaging that we really don't need. Obviously, that is an important use of plastics in medical applications, and that's not even a percentage point of the problem. It is a very, very small application and very, very necessary. So absolutely not. And I think sometimes people try to paint environmentalists as unreasonable, and they'll say that we want to take away medical plastics as a way to sort of discredit the environmental perspective, when really that was never the intention.
And the last one that we'll finish: single-use plastic, the cleanest, most sanitary option for food packaging?
Not necessarily. Again, remember, plastic is made from petroleum. It's chemicals. It leaches chemicals. So even before you get to to any other application, this is a material that is exposing you to chemicals as you consume food from it, from your plastic water bottle, from your takeout container, especially if you put it in the microwave. Not really necessarily the healthiest answer. And so I would say no. I think that's a little bit of a misconception. It seems to be something that's being put out there by the chemical industry and by the plastics industry, which is, again, not really the most reliable source.